In today's brief video, I want to share with you guys one of the most valuable and at the same time most challenging lessons that I learned after struggling for several years with addiction to nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and adult media content. If the message of today's video winds up resonating with you, be sure to check out the pinned comment or the video description to learn more about our free and paid addiction mindset recovery coaching program resources. The lesson that I learned after several years of addiction and then eventually finding sobriety and recovery is that nobody cared about my weed addiction. Nobody cared about the reasons why I smoked weed, and nobody cared about the reasons why I couldn't seem to quit. Nobody cares. Having this realization was one of the most valuable lessons that I learned looking back on my addiction recovery process, because once I came to understand that nobody cared, that nobody was going to save me but me, it was what eventually broke the victim mentality that I had maintained for so many years of my life. And it was something I was completely unaware that I had. Let me start to explain this by providing an example. And I'm going to use a highly controversial example intentionally. When the pandemic hit, it began with healthcare workers, particularly nurses in hospitals, being viewed as our heroes. It was all over the news. Praise our heroes, this and that. These are our healthcare workers. We value them so much. And then it came time to get a certain type of injection. And many healthcare workers weren't on board with this. They didn't feel it was safe for whatever reasons. And they declined. And suddenly, our heroes, quote unquote, were tossed to the curb like a bunch of, chopped, spoiled meat. To be honest, I saw this, I interacted with many of them. Suddenly, our heroes were no longer cared about, and they were no longer going to be taken care of. In fact, many of them went from receiving a paycheck to becoming unemployed. And many others who remained working suffered job losses and pay decreases because many hospitals reported making less money during this time or whatever it was. And guess what? At the end of the day, nobody cared. There wasn't assistance for these people. There wasn't anything. Nobody cared. And this is sad because there's a lot of people who might have empathized with their situation. There's a lot of people who might have sympathized with their situation. But that's not to say that people cared, because they couldn't, because people had their own lives and their own concerns, especially during that time that they had to focus on, right? Now, I want to take back to the example of addiction. If I go to apply for a mortgage for a house, me and my wife recently got a new house. The banker wouldn't have cared if I didn't have money because of addiction. They wouldn't have cared if I had bad credit because of addiction. They wouldn't have cared. The people selling the house, the real estate agent, they might have empathized with the situation. Maybe they would have had a family member that went through something similar. But at the end of the day, they had a job, and that was to sell the house and find a house to move into, period. Just because someone has empathy, just because someone has sympathy, does not mean that they're going to take on the role of your caregiver, an expectation that I had many times throughout my active addiction. Even worse, the people that truly cared, my family, my close friends, maybe a coworker, maybe a teacher along the way, how much did it really matter? At the end of the day, that professor that cared, that wanted to see me succeed, wasn't going to co-sign a loan for my car. They weren't going to co-sign a loan for my business. Very few people in my life were going to take on that level of a role of caring. Yes, there is value to that, though. I will say, and I want to say a disclaimer before I continue, there is value to people caring and people empathizing, right? When I was at very bad low points in my life, just knowing that someone cared, even if they couldn't really change anything in my life, just knowing that someone had sympathy for me, that would pull that there was times where that pulled me out of some of the darkest moments, just having that. So I'm not saying there's no value in that. But beyond that, which that again being a very important thing sometimes, beyond that, in the real world, Even if people did care, how much does it matter? Unless it's the banker, unless it's the attorney that's signing your loan, unless it's the person giving you your paycheck and they're going to float you that check each week, right? Maybe you're in business for yourself. Unless your employees are willing to put up with whatever chaos addiction has put them through. Unless that deal that fell through because of addiction or that client that you didn't secure the deal with is compassionate enough to understand and say, oh, hey, I get it why we lost that money. I get it why you can't pay me this week. They'll move on. They'll go on to find someone or something else. Even if they empathize with you, they don't actually care at the end of the day because it's not their role to be a caregiver. Realizing this was the end of the victim mentality that I had maintained. Acknowledging that many of the excuses I had, many of the scenarios I had found myself in from my upbringing, divorce, this, that, trauma, blah, 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 were valid. Once I realized just because they were valid didn't mean that people were actually going to care and make excuses for me, was game changing when it came to getting sober and seeking a path of recovery and taking 100% accountability for my actions. This is for many people why sobriety and the practice of sobriety is a high tier, the top tier of accountability, the top tier of it, and ownership. That's a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. This is why it is. This conversation is why it is such. People will start to question, so what about someone like me? What about someone who was a therapist or someone like me who's an addiction recovery coach? Do I care? My answer is yes. I care as much as I am invested in your journey, as much as I am invested in wanting to help you succeed. I care about getting people to a point in which they can care for themselves, a point in which they don't need me, they don't need my programs, a point in which they are 100% self-sufficient in regard to addiction recovery, minus maybe the occasional support from friends and family and maybe an individual like myself. That's what I care most about, because my goal is not to care in the sense of a caregiver. My goal is to empathize with you. My goal is to relate to you. And my goal is to help you come up with a plan to get you to be 100% self-sustaining when it comes to your journey of addiction recovery. I care because I struggled with addiction. It's something through my struggle that I became very competent in. And it's something that I've now built a career for myself out of. Obviously, for many of our programs, there's a fee associated with it. And that fee keeps me invested the same way that it keeps you invested. This is a actually large problem with addiction recovery, and I think a large reason why we see so many failed treatment programs. A lot of people who are in the mental health space are grossly underpaid, especially when it comes to government and state-run resources, right? That state counselor, they're grossly underpaid for the problems that they're solving and the things that they're dealing with, and they eventually become uninvested. They can sometimes become uninvested in the people that they're working with. This is kind of a side tangent, and maybe I'll stop and save it for another video. I'll end it with this. Unless you're Mother Teresa, which very, very, very few people are, and I'm certainly not, what's the word? St. Francis. Yes, people care, people have empathy, people want to see you do well. But understanding that only you can eventually care about you, only you can pull yourself out of this 100% with the support of other people. But at the end of the day, it has to be your choice, your decision, and that the world largely doesn't care about the reasons and trials and tribulations why you can't do so. That is when I promise success will be right around the corner, and that success is such a sweet thing. And it was this mentality that I developed through addiction recovery that has hardened me for other obstacles and other challenges that I faced in my life, both in my relationships, in my personal life, in my business life. Realizing that it comes down to me and how much I care, that's what matters. That's what it's all about. And this is one of the most beneficial things that I've received from getting sober and going through this process. And I hope you eventually receive the same. Now, if this video offends you, you probably needed it the most. If this video resonates with you and you want to go deeper, check out our paid one-on-one coaching programs, which again, I'm proud to charge for what we charge because it means you're invested and I'm invested. It guarantees that investment. Or simply download some of our free PDFs, which I'm happy to make because I know what it's like sometimes when you just need a little bit of help and a little bit of sympathy to get you to care about yourself. I'll see you guys in the pinned comment or the video description, or just follow me into the playlist where I teach you how to quit smoking weed on a much less serious note than this video. I'll see you guys there.